Welcome back to Old School Sports and our Franchise Hockey Manager 9 playthrough of the Chicago Blackhawks. We are at the beginning of the 2027 offseason. Blackhawks missed the playoffs for a second consecutive season, which was very disappointing. Good news is that we've got a lot of money to potentially spend. You can see our salary is only about $63.7 million. So we've got a ton of capacity to add some talent in free agency. The less exciting news is that there's not any superstar players available in free agency this year. So we're going to have to be careful. We want to make the team better, but we also don't want to make a long and expensive commitment to a mediocre or slightly above average player. So probably will look to supplement our roster a bit, particularly on the front line in free agency, but hopefully can control ourselves and not go completely wild, since I just don't think there's a ton of great options there. Looking at our roster, we don't have a ton of holes to fill. Jasper Wellstat and Jakob Skarek are going to be back as our goalies next year, and we're going to need to sign Wallstedt to an extension. We traded away our first-round pick coming up in a couple of days, as well as our first-round pick next year, to pick up Wallstedt from the Wild last offseason. And the young goaltender, who still has a lot of ability to improve according to our scouts, could definitely be a top goaltender in the league if he does completely develop. Had a nice year for us too, went 34, 23, and 4, 273 goals against, 916 save percentage. Certainly delivered everything that we would have wanted from him. He's looking for a lot of money, but honestly, almost $7 million a year. But we are committed to him as our star goalie for the foreseeable future. So we might as well go ahead and just get him signed. Obviously would prefer to be able to do it at a somewhat more reasonable level than he's asking for. He's looking for $6.98 million. Let's see what he thinks in 3 years. What does he think about 5 years? It's $6.4 million. Probably not going to go for that, but let's see what he's thinking about that. He'll come down a little bit, but he really only wants 3 years before he can hit free agency, which I get. So $6.6 million for 3 years. Will that get it done? 6.72, so I'm guessing 6.7. Well, he's starting to get frustrated with us. All right, we'll just meet his demand and get him signed. Submit the offer to Wallstedt. So that'll use up a little bit of money starting next season, but not going to impact what we can do this offseason. Our blue line feel like we're in decent shape. Quinn Hughes, obviously the star there. Kevin Korchinski has been up 2 seasons now. Matteo Rotundi joined him last year, midway through the season. Sam Rinzel was also up all of last year as a youngster. Rasmus Anderson will be back probably the final 2 years that he's going to be with us, but a good stay-at-home defenseman. And then we kind of round out the team with David Jaracek and Tobias Bjornfot. So pretty solid there. And we also still have Luke Coughlin, who we picked in the first round a few years back, who's probably going to be fighting for a roster spot this year. So feel like we've got a lot of good quality youth on the blue line. And apologies for my poor production values. Still bouncing back from COVID, but trying to get a episode or 2 out to keep the story going here with the Blackhawks. But as I was mentioning, pretty content with our blue line. Center, feel it's a pretty strong position for us. Bo Horvat, probably will not re-sign him after this year. He's 32 years old, hasn't been as dynamic offensively as we would have hoped. but still with Larkin, Sillinger, and the rookie from last year, Villeneuve, have three really good centers in addition to the youngster Adam Dzeko, who we may be bringing over this year from Europe. Right wing, also feel like we're pretty solid. Mitch Marner, obviously the top player there. Have Travis Konechny and Lauri Paganaimi in the final year of their contracts. And then Frank Nazar, rookie from last year, who should be getting better, who will want to re-sign. So could certainly use maybe one more right wing / center just to give us a little more depth. But I feel like left wing is the position we're really going to potentially want to improve in free agency. We have a couple pretty good players there. Another rookie, Victor Eklund, had a really nice year for us. 17 goals, 26 assists. Gavin Hayes is a guy who's been playing left wing for us more recently due to the weakness we have at that position, but can play anywhere on the front line for us. Alex Fermenton in the final year of his contract. Paul Cotter, 2 years left, and Linus Eriksson, another guy similar to Dzeko that we could be bringing over from Europe this year as a young prospect, but feel like a really established professional left winger who could play on the second or third line for us behind, presumably Eklund will be our number one line left winger, with Larkin and Marner most likely. Hopefully that line can generate a lot of offense. And Gavin Hayes is probably going to be our second liner. But if we can bring up an established left winger who can play on the third or fourth line for us and give us a little more of an established presence there, that may be what we really want to look for in free agency. But again, we don't want to bust the bank since there's no obvious great player at any position available. And most of the guys who are available are a little older. So I think we can bring on someone who can help us. We just want to make sure we do it in a fiscally responsible way and in not a incredibly long-term way, given that we've got a lot of younger players that we're going to want to be signing to extensions over the next few years. And while we're thinking about the younger players that we want to sign to extensions, we'll look at everyone who's in the final year of their contract. We've already made the offer to Wallstat, as you know. Rotundi and Rinzel are both big-time parts of our future, hopefully as defensemen. So we're going to try to get offers out to both of them. Hopefully they're not looking for crazy, crazy money yet, but it certainly is possible. Yeah, Rotundi, $1.4 million a year for 3 years. Would love to sign him for that kind of contract. See if he'll go for a little less at 1.25, and see if he'll give us a fourth year. I'm sure he won't. Actually, for 1.39, he will go 4 years. All right, if we up it to 1.4 million, can we get him for 5 years, or is that asking too much? He's willing to think about it, so that would be a really nice contract for us to get Matteo Rotundi signed for another 5 years at 1.4 million. We'll go ahead and submit that offer to him. Moving on to Rinzel, who was so dynamic offensively as a rookie, scoring 19 goals right out of the NCAA. Tend to think he'll be looking for a bit more money. Yeah, $2.5 million for 4 years. How about $2.25 million for 6 years? We'll really lock him up. I can't imagine he'll go for that, but yeah, 2.48 for 4 years. So he's really committed to 4 years. We'll come back, $2.35 million for 4 years. He's willing to think about that. So hopefully can get both of those guys signed in addition to Wallstat. Now moving on to the 5 frontline guys we have who are going to be free agents after this year. Formenton's been a decent left winger for us over the years. Tend to think he's probably going to be looking for too much. Yeah, 4.8 million, definitely not a contract we want to chase after for Alex Formenton. I'm guessing that Lauri Paganaimi is also going to be pretty expensive. Yeah, 5 million a year for 3 years. Expected him to do a little more defensively than he did last year, so not a contract that I feel we have to chase right now. Travis Konechny making 4.75 million. He's 30 years old now. Going to turn 31 before the end of the season. He'll probably be looking for pretty big money too. Yeah, 6 million a year for 3 years. Another contract we don't have to chase after right now. Horvat probably going to be looking for even more. 5.4 million a year for 3 years, so he's getting reasonable at least in what he's looking for, and it's going to be less than what he's making now. Issue is that he's 32, going to be turning 33 before the end of the year. I don't know that we want a 5 million plus a year commitment to a guy through his mid to late 30s. So feel like that's not a contract we have to chase at right now either. Frank Nazar, we do want to bring back. Had a nice rookie year for us last year. Looking for 2.2 million a year for 3 years. Again, we'll try to get him for a little longer. 2.15 million a year for 4 years. What do you think of that, Frankie? I think we can get him at 2.25 million a year for 4 years. Yep, he's willing to think about that. So we do have at this point offers out to the 4 young and potentially restricted free agents on our team in Wallstat, Rotundi, Rinzel, and Nazar. So hopefully get all those guys locked up over the next few days, and then we'll monitor the older players, primarily frontliners, over the course of the season. Possible we bring 1 or 2 of those guys back next year, but possible that we also use their departures as an opportunity to keep the youth movement going and invest more heavily into some of the young talent on our team. And there are 3 young players on free agency who were picked in the 3rd round in the case of Will Shields, 3rd round in the case of Christopher Brown, and then 4th round in the case of Ross Campbell, who just were not signed by their teams. Kind of a, I think at this point, relatively well-known bug in franchise hockey manager that players like this somehow don't get signed to their entry-level contracts by their teams. If they were 1st or 2nd round picks, I would just kind of not go after them as a house rule. Given that they were 3rd and 4th rounders, though, maybe there's a reason why the teams didn't sign them. I can't figure out exactly what it is. But we're going to go ahead and make an offer to Will Shields. I don't know whether we'll be able to pick him up or not, but we'll go ahead and meet his demand for an entry-level contract. See if maybe we can get him signed. If he ends up signing with somebody else, that's fine. We're going to also try to bring back our former drafty and AHL goalie, Drew Comesso, who still we think has decent potential. He's also a free agent. If we can get him on a 2-way contract, I would love that. I don't know that he's going to go for that. But if he's willing to sign a 2-way contract with us, that would not be some bad insurance for us behind Wallstat and Skarek. And he's willing to think about that. So we could have him back as the number 3 goalie in our organization. And given that we could use, as I mentioned, some help primarily at left wing, I think I'm most interested in potentially bringing on Yegor Sharangovich. He can play anywhere on the front line, but is most notably a left wing, and that's where we have the biggest need. Pretty good mental and offensive ratings, fine physically, and decent defensively. He's not a total disaster defensively, not the best hitter and not the best positioning in the world, but he is pretty decent with his defensive read, a good stick checker, pretty good at checking in general. So he's not totally useless as far as his defensive contributions, and he, has in the past been a interesting offensive player. So he would not be a bad guy as a third line left winger for us. Issue is he is looking for 3 years at a little over $5 million. He's going to turn 30 after this upcoming season. So this would take him through his year 32 season. We've got enough of a hole at left wing, and the money that he's looking for is not so excessive that I'm unwilling to go 3 years. So we're going to offer him 3 years at just $4.75 million. He wants a little more than that. If we up it to 4.85, he is willing to think about that. So we're going to put the offer out to Yegor. And I think, though, that even though we've got, excuse me, money to spend, I think that may be it for us and the free agents. A little intrigued by Marty Necas. But he's looking for almost $6.5 million a year. He's going to be turning 29 in the middle of this season, and right wing and center aren't as critical needs for us, particularly if we're able to bring in the youngster Shields. So I think for the time being, we're going to hold tight on making any other offers. And some good news, Jesper Wellstat signed the new deal. We're negotiating with Shields and Sharangovich, as well as Comesso, Nazar, Rotundi, and Rinzel all signed. So no need to get into long debates with those four. Got all of the guys that were on our team last year signed to those extensions. So view that as a pretty positive step forward for the Blackhawks to have our goaltender of the future, 2 key defensemen of the future, and an important winger for the future in Nazar, all locked up for the next several seasons now. And there's also a few young defensemen who were later round draft picks that are available. I may make an offer to Brady Ness, who had been a third round pick by the Jets 3 years ago that just was not signed by them. I don't really understand why. We don't have a huge need for defensemen, as I said, but always willing to bring more talent into our organization. So we're going to go ahead and offer an entry-level type contract to him as well. And perhaps not surprisingly, Brady Ness looking for more in his entry-level deal. Not going to go crazy chasing after him. Kind of interested if you have thoughts down below. How do you handle these younger players with lots of potential like Ness who somehow make it to free agency? As I talked about, I kind of have a house rule, I guess, at this point where if there's a player like Zane Parekh, and granted, he's got a fractured skull, so there actually may be a reason that they didn't offer him a contract. But he was a first-round pick. If guys were first or second-round picks, I just don't go after them. But it still seems like there is a large number of players like Ness and Campbell and Train and Ovcharov and Filion who end up becoming free agents in their early 20s. And I guess I could just sign a bunch of these players and then like trade them away for good draft picks and really kind of build the team that way. I choose not to do that. Generally, you'll just sign one or two of them a year. Maybe I shouldn't sign any of them, but if you have thoughts on how you kind of handle this in your playthroughs, whether there's any house rules you use on this, or whether you just kind of view it as, hey, they're free agents, they're on the open market, sign them all. Would love to hear how others approach the, to my perspective, inordinately large number of really good players in their early 20s that somehow make it to free agency in this game. And we are going to make an offer to the left defenseman, Filion. He is a guy who was a 6th round draft pick. So again, it makes a little more sense that maybe he would have never been signed to an entry-level contract. But at least according to our scouts, there's some potential there. So we're certainly going to make an offer to him, see if maybe we can bring him on board. And Filion likes our contract offer, so here on July 4th, we do have a decent amount of offers out at this point. Will Shields made the offer to him. Got the offer outstanding, of course, to Sharangovich, Filion, and Drew Comesso. So we've got those 4 active offers out to free agents. Re-signed the 4 young guys that we talked about already. If we can get these guys signed, I think that may be kind of it for our big moves here in the early parts of the 2027 offseason. And we're getting ready for the draft lottery. As I mentioned earlier, we had traded away our 1st round pick this year and next year to the Wild for Wallstat. So we'll see if they move up from the 16th spot that they're expected to be in with the pick that we gave to them. Nope, they're right where they should be at number 16. So at least I'll feel a little less bad that than I would have if they had moved up to like the 2nd pick in the draft or something. And the Islanders, Blues, and Red Wings are going to have the first 3 picks in the draft. We will not be picking until number 48, given that we don't have a 1st rounder this year. And at least according to our scouts, seems like it was a pretty low talent draft. Here in the middle of the 2nd round, you can see there's only a handful of 2.5-star players out there, according to our scouts. So although we've got a lot of picks coming up in the later rounds with 4 5th-rounders and 3 6th-rounders, probably not going to be a ton of talent for us to bring on board in the draft this year, unfortunately. And with that 2nd-round pick, we're going to go for the youngest player with 2.5-star potential and the only North American player that's available with 2.5-star potential, the young goalie, Tyler Goodfellow out of Canada. He's viewed, according to our scouts, as a pretty risky prospect, but I don't think there's a ton of great talent out there at this point, so we're going to go ahead and pick him and see what, if anything, is available when we get into our later picks. In the 3rd round, you can see several of those theoretically higher potential European players are still around. Maybe we'll go for one of them now. And in the 3rd round, we're going to go with the 20-year-old speed, Dick Larson. Don't know that he's ever going to develop into a big-time player for us. Decent physical and defensive ratings. Offensively and mentally, he's got a lot of growth still ahead of him, but he is only 20 years old, so we'll pick him here in the third round. And not shockingly, given we didn't have a first-round pick, we don't feature among the best drafts in the draft, but also aren't among the worst either. So right in that juicy middle part of the draft where it's going to be hard for us to really improve from the mediocre record we've put forth most of our years here as general manager and head coach of the Blackhawks. And although it seemed like the talent in the draft dropped off pretty quickly by the time we had our first pick at number 48, left winger Robin Lazone, who the Islanders picked first overall, certainly looks like a potentially incredible prospect coming off a year in the Quebec Juniors where he had 140 points, including 60 goals. Looks like he could be an absolutely dynamic offensive player for the Isles in the not-so-distant future. And after the draft, we did get the free agents all signed up. Will Shields, who's got some potential. Sharangovich, who's going to take over as a left winger for us. Comesso, hopefully, will be a goalie for us in the AHL. And then Fillon, who will be, a defenseman with some potential for us down the line. So would view that as a pretty decent beginning to free agency for the Blackhawks. And although we're only at around $68 million in terms of our salary obligations with the addition of Sharangovich, I think we're probably about done for free agency. I don't want to chase after bad contracts. I think you could certainly argue that maybe Sharangovich is a bad contract, but he definitely gives us another professional left winger behind Eklund and Hayes, which I think was important. Feel a lot better with Fermenton and Cotter as kind of our fourth line guys than both in the starting lineup as a third and a fourth liner for us. Center, kind of like where we are. And the youngster Will Shields probably is going to be able to make an impact as a rookie for us too. So feel we've added a couple of frontline players in Shields and Sharangovich who can help us immediately this coming year. And we're still kind of fine at defense because Luke Coughlin isn't even on the 23-man roster yet. And he will definitely, I believe, be battling with the likes of Jiracek and Bjorn Fott for probably that 6th and 7th defenseman position on our roster. And as the calendar turns to August, going to throw out a random offer on right defenseman Corson Sulemans. He's a restricted free agent from the Blue Jackets. My assumption is that they'll match this offer. He's only looking for $1.37 million for 2 years. We're going to offer him even more than that, $1.45 million for 3 years. I'm sure that, as I mentioned, the Blue Jackets will match the offer sheet, but if we can pick him up for a third rounder in 2028, I don't think that would be a bad signing for us at all. And we've got 4 new Hockey Hall of Famers, Joe Thornton, Chris Pronger, Matthew Schneider, and Chris Osgood. And not surprisingly, the Blue Jackets matched our offer sheet to Sulemans. No shock there. And we're going to try to build out our organization a little bit, make an offer to Noah Ostland. Played one game with the Sabres last year, has mostly been with them in the AHL since he was drafted by them several years ago, but a 23-year-old, still a free agent here in August. Sabres have the opportunity to match us, so I tend to think they probably will. We'll try to make it a little less attractive for them to match, but I'm sure they'll end up matching our offer to him. We'll offer him $800,000 a year over 3 years, and see if we can get him to do a two-way, which is only going to make it even easier for the Sabres to match the deal, I'm sure. But yeah, he's not interested in a two-way. That's fine. We'll submit an offer sheet to him. No compensation needed. I'm sure that Buffalo will end up matching this offer. And not surprisingly, Sabres matched our offer for Ostland. We did sign another entry-level player that we had drafted years ago in Jordan Forget. So another frontline player who may be able to help us a little bit if we have some injuries over the next year or so, and could develop into a useful player for us down the line. And as the calendar turns to September, we've signed a couple other young free agent players with a little bit of potential. Left defenseman Tyson Buksowski and center Parker Forlin, both guys who were free agents, had either not been drafted or were late-round draft picks several years ago, and just never got any traction with their original organizations. So we'll see if they can give us a little bit of depth in our roster in the event of injuries, and who knows, maybe one of them will become a useful player for us down the line. And we've now simmed ahead to the start of the preseason, so we are going to be bringing a lot more players up onto our roster. Look at the schedule over the next couple of weeks. You can see we got a game against Carolina tonight, Toronto, Calgary, Nashville, and Colorado, and then a couple final preseason games in October against Calgary and Boston. Then we'll make the final cuts to get down to a 23-man roster. Probably won't look materially different than we think it looks like now, so probably going to be in the high 60s of millions for our salary. So if there are any high-quality cap casualties that hit the waiver wire, we will be in a pretty advantageous position to be able to bring on somebody if it's one of those unique years you get every several seasons where there's a pretty high quality player who's making a lot of money who a team happens to move on from. We could have the opportunity to add some talent that way over the next couple of weeks. And we did get a 7-4 win in our opening game of the preseason. A massive night for Mitch Marner with 4 goals and an assist. Alex Formenton, the left winger, torn hammy, going to be out for 1 to 2 months. Have the opportunity to delay treatment, but given that we're still a couple of weeks away from the season even started, not going to delay his treatment. Going to put him onto the IL, and hopefully he will be back and healthy sometime in early November. And as we get ready to have the season started, we've made it to October, just a couple of preseason games left. Going to bump up the team morale spending once again. Hopefully be selling out every game. Taking a look at our job security, should finish in the top half of the league this year. That's the expectation. Fan happiness, still not very good. Fortunately, the signings of Sharangovich and Shields helped a bit, along with some new season optimism. But we're going to need to make some progress with the fans by winning some games in the early stages of this season. Team harmony, pretty good. Have a good locker room at this point. Three good leaders in Horvat, Marner, and Larkin, who are also, particularly in the cases of Marner and Larkin, pretty big time contributors for us, particularly offensively. Sharangovich, the new addition, is unpopular, so that's not optimal, but hopefully his contributions on the ice will help offset that. And taking a look at our training camp development, been pretty good, it looks like. You can see some of the youngsters, Buksowski, Comesso, even Paul Cotter, Luke Coughlin, Mathis Dubé, Victor Eklund, Linus Eriksson, Jordan Forget, Adam Jecko particularly, David Jaracek, Carter Klipsenstein, Kevin Korchinski, Rinzel got a little better, even though he's been banged up. Rotundi, Sillinger, Villeneuve. A lot of the young players improving in multiple areas, which is great to see. And given that we're a relatively young team, only one guy going in the wrong direction, Bo Horvat. We talked about him earlier in this episode. Pretty unlikely, I think, that we will be signing him to an extension to bring him back. He'll be 33 years old next year. And once again, the Blackhawks, with almost 18,000 season tickets, led the NHL in season ticket sales. We've had really good attendance in the United Center, so we're also in the midst of a construction project building a new arena. But until that is constructed, it seems like we're doing pretty well at the United Center anyways. And another minor injury, Sharangovich, going to be out for about 7 days, so it's possible that he'll be ready by the time we're, excuse me, playing our first game in the regular season. But in the interest of being conservative for this final preseason game, we're going to go ahead and put him on the IL. So that leaves us with 3 players on the IL right now. Fortunately, none of them are all that serious. Rinzel has been day-to-day for a while now, but we've been conservative with him. Sharangovich, the same thing. And then Formenton, as we talked about earlier, the most significant injury, still going to be 1 to 2 months with that torn hammy. But I don't think, I mean, he was kind of going to be a third or more likely fourth line left winger for us anyways this year, so not a huge loss. He's also in the final year of his contract, unlikely that we'll be extending him, so it'll give us an opportunity to maybe have a younger player break camp with us and play, get a few games of action over the couple weeks while Formenton's out before we have to make a decision on bringing him back. And as we break training camp with the 3 players we mentioned on the IL, going to have some interesting potential roster issues. Obviously, Wallstat and Skarek ends up as our goalies. Left defensemen, right now, Bjornfot, Hughes, Korchinski, Rotundi, and then the rookie Coughlin. Right defenders, Anderson and Jaracek. Clearly, we will have Rinzel coming back, hopefully before the season even starts. And then we're going to have a tough decision whether we want to move on from Bjornfot or send the youngster Luke Coughlin down. Don't think he really has anything left to prove in the AHL, so I'm inclined to want to keep him up this year, get him the seasoning at the NHL level. But that'll be one decision that's coming up. Looking at our left wing right now, that's been a position of weakness for us. And obviously with Formenton and Sharangovich on the IL, it's an even weaker position than normal right now. So Linus Eriksson, the Swedish player we drafted a couple years ago, we're not going to send him back for more seasoning in Europe. He's going to make the roster, at least for the time being, as kind of a fourth line winger for us. Probably will end up quickly moving on and giving him some seasoning in the AHL, though. Other than that, Cotter Eklund and Hayes are our left wingers on the 23-man roster. Center, no surprises. Larkin, Horvat, Sillinger, and Villeneuve is our top four. For the time being, with the injuries, Mathis Dubé, who can also play left wing for us, is going to be on the 23-man roster. And then at right wing, no surprises either there with Marner, Konechny, Paganaimi, Nazar, and Shields, who we signed as a free agent in the offseason. Give him an opportunity to see if he can contribute at the NHL level right from the start. So at this point, it's only October 4th, and we've got all the way till October 15th, so over a week and a half till our first game of the regular season. So I would certainly think that over that time period, Rinzel and Sharangovich will be back, which will require us to make a move, as I said, on most likely either Coughlin or Bjornfot. And then we'll also have to make a move on one of the younger right wingers to make room on the roster to bring up the one big free agent signing we had this past offseason in Sharangovich. And then obviously over the next week and a half, I'm going to see if there's anyone interesting on waivers. Our team salary right now is less than $63 million, even though we will be bringing back some higher-priced players in Sharangovich and Formenton eventually. We've got plenty of opportunity to take on anyone in the NHL in terms of their salary if there's a wacky cut over the coming days. And unfortunately, but not completely surprisingly, it doesn't look like there's any superstars who were released in the initial waivers. But certainly some players who could be useful. Tice Thompson. Made an assumption there without looking at him closely. Olivier Nadeau. Goalie right here, Philip Svedebak. Certainly looks like he's got a lot of potential from the Bruins organization. What's his contract look like? Not making a ton of money. I guess the question is whether we'd want to potentially view him as an upgrade to Jakub Skarek and potentially bring him on board. So definitely some things for us to think about. Kind of interesting, Noah Ostlund, who we made an offer to that Buffalo matched, is also being waived at this point. And comparing Philip Svedebak to Jakub Skarek, they're pretty similar players. Mentally, they're really close. I'd say that probably prefer Svedebak's profile a little bit. In terms of goalie ratings, they're also pretty close. You could make an argument Skarek's a little bit better, a little better passing, poke checking, and with the blocker. Not quite as good with rebounds and recovery, but Skarek a little better with puck handling, but not as good with low shots, not as good a skater, and not as good with his reflexes. So they are really similar. But thinking about team harmony, Skarek is unpopular. So there is, I think, an argument to be made to maybe look at moving on from him from a player who is very similar, maybe a little bit better in terms of Svedebak, but who also might fit in a little better in the locker room. Going to be an interesting decision. I don't think it's a franchise-altering decision either way, since obviously Wallstadt's going to be our number one guy, but Skarek's older, and he just doesn't have as much potential as we think we see in Svedebak. So I think we're going to go ahead and claim him. Other than that, I don't see anyone that we really need to bring on board. So we'll see whether that claim goes through, and then maybe look to be trading away Jakob Skarak. And our claim for Svedebak did go through. And also looking at the NHL season preview, we're listed as the early Stanley Cup favorites. I don't know if that's accurate, but hopefully we'll be better than we have been over the last couple of seasons. Haven't really changed that much during this offseason, so the fact that we would have went from a team that just missed the playoffs to being the Stanley Cup favorites is a little bit odd, but maybe they're looking at all of the youth that we have on the team and expecting those players to continue to improve. And regardless, I'm glad that there's some high expectations for us this year. Hopefully we can meet them. And with the higher potential and younger Svedebak now on the roster, who's making similar money to Skarak, we're going to see what, if anything, we can get for him in a trade right now. And there are a few offers out there. Probably most interested in draft pick compensation, if anyone. Only a 7th rounder. Oof. And we'll go ahead and just take the 7th rounder from Edmonton to avoid having to keep that salary on our team. So thanks, Skarak, for being a good backup the last couple years, but think that we have upgraded a little bit at our backup goalie position, bringing on Svedebak to join Wallstat. And you can see we've got 2 Swedes in goalie now, so maybe there will be some synergies there with those two becoming buddies. Actually, we've got a lot of Swedish players on the team. Bjorn Fott, although he could lose a spot. Rasmus Anderson, Victor Eklund, Linus Eriksson, although he won't be up very long. But other than Canadians, we've actually got more Swedish players than Americans on the roster right now. Next day of waivers, interesting to see our former defenseman Caleb Jones also being waived by Boston. I don't think we'll be bringing him back, but still interesting to see him on the waiver wire. And Sharangovich is now completely healthy. Rinzel pretty close to being ready to come back, given that we've still got 5 days till the season begins. Have no doubt that Rinzel will be recovered from his dizziness and nausea by then. But most importantly, with Sharangovich back, that will allow us to move on from Linus Eriksson, and we can still loan him back to Europe. I think that's probably what we're going to do, because I don't think he's quite as ready as a lot of the other players on the team. So we will loan him back to the Rodovre Mighty Bulls. And Sharangovich will be hopefully healthy and ready to make his Blackhawks debut in a few days. And Rinzel now also back, so we'll take him off of the IL. Formenton, as you can see, is still a couple of 1 to 2 months away. So now the big decision with Rinzel coming back is who do we move on from? Luke Coughlin, the rookie who we picked in the first round, our first draft with the team? Or do we move on from Bjorn Fott, who we picked up off the waiver wire last year? Only played 4 games for us. A good stay-at-home defenseman. Like the fact that he can play on both the left and the right sides. Because with the youngsters, Korchinski, Rotundi, and Coughlin, Rotundi is really the only one that gives us the versatility to play on either side. Quinn Hughes obviously can too. I think I'm going to see what we can get in a trade for Bjorn Fott. As I've talked about, Coughlin doesn't have anything else left to prove in the AHL at this point, and we still think he's got a lot of upside. Would like to get a look over the course of a full season is what he can do for us. So, any market for Tobias Bjornfot? And it doesn't look like it's robust. Penguins would give us the 25-year-old left winger Karen Gallant. Edmonton would give us a 6th-round pick. There is certainly an argument to try to sneak him to the AHL. I tend to think Edmonton might pick him up since they're going to give us a 6th-rounder for him, so we're just going to go ahead and complete that trade. And another interesting player on waivers here as we get real close to the season, Xavier Bourgault, scored 21 goals for Edmonton last year. Also was plus 22 for them. Can play center and right wing, 24 years old. Pretty interesting player. I think we're going to pass on him, though, because to bring him on board, we would have to get rid of Will Shields, who we just signed as a free agent this offseason, even younger with a lot of potential, or Mathis Dubé, who another guy who's come up through our organization with a lot of potential, only 20 years old. As good as Bourgault is, I don't think he's going to be as good as Dubé or Shields could become. So I just don't think there is a reason to bring him on board, even though he's a pretty decent player. And we've made it to opening night, excuse me, against the Flyers. So the Blackhawks roster, only about $65 million, so plenty of opportunity if we want to make some trades as we get into the season. If we really are competing for the Stanley Cup, as some of the prognosticators believe we will be, we've got the opportunity to take on some contracts as we get further into the season. So didn't make a ton of changes, but like the team as the 2027-28 season is ready to begin. Hopefully the notable additions of the offseason, most notably Sharangovich, the fact we've got a new backup goalie in Sveta back at this point, Luke Coughlin going to be making his long-awaited NHL debut, Will Shields is a free agent who has joined the team, Dubé we brought up through the organization, definitely some new guys on the roster, some young guys on the roster who we still expect to continue improving. So we've got high expectations for these Blackhawks, and we're going to find out how they do in beginning to try to meet those expectations in our next episode. Until then, thanks so much for watching, and hope you have a great day.